Talk to me. I could see and feel everything on the other side. I'm here. He's gonna bring it back! He's gonna bring it back! Are you in there?
When we talk about modern horror, it always comes at it from an angle of there is a resurgence. This is such a big pickup from where we were in the 2000s and the early 2010s. What we have seen from about 2015, 2016, maybe a bit earlier than that, is that there is an ascension of the genre in many different ways. There is the Lego sequels in Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. There is the continuation of slashers with new slasher films. Then there is the independent indie horror, art house horror films that have become critical darlings and haven't necessarily ascended to the level of award spectacle. But if you asked a lot of people, do you think this deserves an Oscar or does this performance deserve an Oscar? There will be many cases that you can make for art house films getting something, whether it is Hereditary and Toni Collette's performance, whether it was Midsommar being arguably the best film that came out in 2017, or whether it is The Witch simply on costume design and set design. There are things about art house horror that feels refreshing and feels new from the past 10 years. With that being said, the director who was seen as the face of art house horror is no longer working in the genre, and that is Ari Aster, who made Hereditary and then Midsommar. So with his exit from the genre and moving into things more like black comedy and westerns, there is a need and a vacuum to be filled that in some part has been filled by the likes of Robert Eggers, Zach Cregger maybe, and then my personal favourite being the twin Australian duo, the Philippou brothers, Danny and Michael Philippou, who started as content creators here on YouTube under the channel name RackaRacka. They were long known as horror comedy creators on the platform and have since gone on to being well-renowned directors within the A24 world. Their first film was in 2022 one of my favourite films of the year. Their feature film debut, Talk to Me, is a sort of raw, sort of skin and bones story centered around mental health and centered around the idea of talking to someone who has passed from your life and how that can be manipulated by the dead to kill you or to kill those around you. Essentially, that entire story is an allegory for mental health and how it is necessary to talk to people for your own mental health and for theirs. If you don't, it will eat you up and eventually the worst can happen. In this follow-up, Bring Her Back, the story focuses on a similar theme of grief and attempting to bring that person back, even when you know in your heart of hearts it's not possible, and how you will do anything you can possibly do in order to just have one more conversation with that person. It's a harrowing theme, it's a harrowing film, and in my opinion, these two films feel as if they're in ascension. I don't really know what this duo is ascending to, but I am in for the ride wherever they go. Now, there is two things that I will say about this film in reference to Talk to Me. I believe that this film is more fleshed out. I think, as I say, Talk to Me is more skin and bones. I will say that I think Talk to Me is probably a stronger concept at its base level. That is because Talk to Me has a MacGuffin, and that is the object that they use to talk to the dead. Bring Her Back doesn't have that, so at its base level, it's not as focused necessarily, but its concept and its thematic idea, when they are fleshed out, are so much deeper than Talk to Me. And that's not to say Talk to Me isn't deep, because it is already. And so I'm saying I think Bring Her Back is even deeper. On the other hand, what really works for Bring Her Back as well is this sort of ascension of really disturbing both psychological and physical moments in the Philippou brothers films. In Bring Her Back, I think it is even more disturbing than Talk to Me, and I already thought Talk to Me was pretty fucked up, but in Talk to Me, I can watch that film, I can sit down and watch that film and have a pretty fun time. In Bring Her Back, I don't think that is possible in any way. You're in for a pretty miserable time, a pretty depressing and upsetting time with this film, and I don't say that to demean the film, I don't say that to mean that it's bad. I think that's really excellent, but I can't see me switching this on and watching the final half an hour with some friends. This is really, really focused on this idea of you have to learn the grief process. If you don't learn it, you will get eaten up by it. And that's not an idea that you can have very much fun with, but it is one that makes for a really compelling and disturbing story in this film. And to both the strength of the directors and the actors, they all sell it incredibly well. Talk to Me and Bring Her Back both feel like they could be stylistically in the same world. They look very similar, despite the fact that they both almost have their own unique style. The fact that they have a uniqueness to each of them, despite looking incredibly similar, is a credit to the actors in both Talk to Me and Bring Her Back. In Bring Her Back, I was only aware of one of the actors before going into this, and that is Sally Hawkins. She does an incredible job in this film. She, to me, feels a bit like Toni Collette in Hereditary, where you've seen her in stuff before. Maybe you've seen her in upsetting stuff, not very happy stuff, but this is such a left turn that you are like, where have you been hiding this? And it comes for both of these actors much later into their careers. It's not coming at the age of 25, 30, it's coming at the age of 50 or around there. That's why it's so disturbing, is because we've seen you doing things like Paddington and Wonka, and now you're doing this? Alright, I didn't know you had that in your locker. Fair enough. I want to see more of that now. It's really compelling. She really sells this idea of someone who is so eaten up by grief, they will do whatever and believe whatever in order to just see her daughter one last time. And you're never looking at her and going, she's an evil person. She's just a person who's so distraught that she will risk everyone else's lives. And she does some pretty fucked up things, obviously, in the film. But I never really feel like she does it from a place of evil or malevolence. Everything she does in the film is done from a place of love. You are forced by the film to attempt to be empathetic for her through some of the imagery that you see of her daughter. You do feel for her. If you don't feel for her, I would probably suggest checking in with a psychologist. And I have never hoped for a group of kids to make it out of the end of a film more than the kids played by Sora, Wong, Billy Barratt, and Jonah, Wren, Phillips. None of these three I was aware of before this film, and all three do an incredibly compelling job of selling their characters. Each of them have a lot to carry. Sora Wong, being a partially blind actress, has a lot to carry because she has to sell her lines in order to make you feel what she is feeling. She can't necessarily emote with her face the same way that a lot of other actors can. So her job, especially at the age of 14 and especially in her first career role, it's a pretty difficult job for her, and she does incredibly well. Billy Barratt arguably has the most to carry because he's the emotional weight of the film. He's the one who's really trying to learn the grief process and overcome his fears that stem from that. And then Jonah, Wren, Phillips, who is basically the face of this film. He's on all the posters. He is great, he is terrifying, and yet you also understand that what he's going through isn't really his fault. And again, you have to have that thing of empathy for him, and it's difficult, but given the fact that he's a 10-year-old boy, and given how good Jonah, Wren, Phillips is at playing this character, it's really sold for you, and I was completely in with all of these characters. I felt empathy for all of them, yet I didn't want all of them to succeed in what they're doing. And this is such a narratively hard thing to do, is to have characters opposed on either side of a story and yet make the audience feel for all of your characters. That's such a hard thing to do, and it's something that I wouldn't expect someone in their second outing to do. And I'm really impressed with the Philippou brothers for that. I will say that I think some of the stylistic choices that they go for, both narratively and direction-wise in this film, are kind of pointless. The snuff film inclusion stuff I just thought was weird and makes it raw and low budget feeling when the film isn't that quite clearly. It had a budget of around 15 million, so it's clearly not that low budget, and it doesn't look that low budget, so I don't really understand why you would try to make it look like that. In my opinion, I would just prefer to see a full snuff film made by them. It makes for some unnecessary exposition, in my opinion, because actually the strength of the film is not knowing the ritual that is the center focus and only getting bits and pieces of it. So the snuff film attempting to fill those holes, narratively, I understand it, but it's not fun to look at, and it's a bit ridiculous in parts, and it makes for a bit of a convoluted ending. But I will say, I think the ending still wraps up pretty satisfactory, and I was pretty satisfied with where it ends, although I still left the cinema fully disturbed, wanting to never see this film again, although I definitely will do. This is a real feat of brilliance, in my opinion. I don't know if it's necessarily the best horror film of the year, but it is the most disturbing film of the year. And as I say, I feel as if the Philippou brothers are only in ascension. I really want to know what is going to be their magnum opus. I don't think they're anywhere near the height of their powers, so I want to see what that looks like. And whether it is the next film or whether it's 10 years down the line, they've got a run forming here that is already very, very good. And they appear to only be getting better. It's a really compelling thing that they're doing, of taking these base concepts of talking to the dead, trying to bring the dead back, and then we're going to use that one worn out horror idea and we're going to flesh a theme around that idea of mental health or grief. We're going to fuse those two things together, and we're going to make a film that you've never really seen before, because even Hereditary and Midsommar aren't really about themes like this. One of them is a family ghost story. The other one is a breakup movie. These films from the Philippou brothers, to me, seem a lot more focused on the psychological element. They seem a lot more focused on what is going on in here as a result of something else. I think they're currently probably some of the best working horror directors, if not some of the best working directors altogether. For me, they're probably top 15 right now. And whatever they make, I'm in. I'm really excited for what Talk to Me 2 looks like. I would have been really interested to see what their Street Fighter film looked like, although they stepped away from that. A film like this is never going to win Oscars. It's never going to get any buzz around that. But Sally Hawkins alone, I think, deserved some of that praise, if not even the kids. The idea that some of these kids are fighting with, one of them essentially having a demon inside of them, one of them learning the grief process, and then the other one essentially being lost as a result of her sight and having to work out through her other senses and her familial connections what is right, what is wrong, who's lying, who's telling the truth. These brothers are probably the best working horror directors right now. I think I probably prefer this over Sinners. I think Sinners is arguably a more finished film and a lot more focused. But again, even with Sinners, I didn't like some of the narrative decisions in that film. And I think ultimately, this film, 28 years later, Sinners, your choice of what you prefer will come down to what you prefer from horror. And I think for me, at the top of the pack is probably this film and 28 years later. Although we have Weapons coming in a couple weeks, and I'm expecting that to be a barnstormer.